Hi, everyone. Hello, happy 2022. Welcome to Sense of Place, Season 12. My name is Sarah Fox. I'm the host and curator of this program, and I'm psyched to have you guys tonight. I'm looking down the list and seeing folks from both the Gorge, from Seattle. I think we have someone maybe even from St. Louis. So it's a highlight to have folks be able to tune in from all across the country tonight to listen to Frances Ambrose Fischer talk to us about our incredible native bees. I've already learned so much just in having conversations with her prior to tonight. And I'm psyched to have her tell us why these little pollinators are so important to our sense of place and what we can do to help them survive and why they dance. So that is coming up. But before we get to Frances, I have a couple of announcements. The first one I am particularly excited about because we have two of our presenters from last season who have recently received some really incredible honors. Gladys Rivera, some of you guys may recall from December last year, was recently rewarded the prestigious Health Equity and Social Justice Award from the Oregon Primary Care Association. You may recall she joined me last season for a conversation about being born and raised in Hood River, being a member of our city council, working in preventative health, and in general, being an all-round community-minded, hands-in-everything kind of woman. And so it's great to see that she's getting some recognition, more recognition than she's already gotten because she's gotten a lot for everything she does. And then we have Chuck Sams, who led off last season and spoke about the unique Indigenous perspective on pandemics, not just our current one, but past pandemics as well. And some of you may have seen that Chuck Sams was just sworn in as the new director of the National Park Service. So huge deal. So excited for Gladys and Chuck. I can't say for sure that appearing on Sense of Place was a launching pad for them. I mean, it's quite a coincidence. The president didn't call me, so I can't confirm. But all joking aside, I feel very lucky that we got to have them come share time with us and their experiences and expertise last season. And I hope that if you didn't get a chance to hear them, that at some point you'll head over to our Sense of Place archive and hear what they had to share. Really two incredible individuals. Also, it's wintertime, which means that you may be stuck in your home, or you're stuck in your car driving to the mountain or waiting in line to get to the mountain, and you need something to keep you company. And I think you should head over to hereinthegorge.com. That's our companion podcast. You can get it anywhere you find a podcast. And we have an episode coming up on wild mushrooms with Michael Bugh, who you might remember from earlier this season for Sense of Place. And also a really special check-in with Homer Yasui, who, if you follow the podcast, you know he was featured in the very first episode called Almost Home, which looked at a little bit of the Japanese history that we have here in the Gorge. And I have a brief check-in coming up with Homer where you can hear what he's been up to. He was 91, I believe, when the episode came out, and he's 97 now, and just as sharp and incredible as always. So keep that on your list of things to do when the winter doldrums are getting you down. Lots going for us. So the reason we can do all this is because we have sponsors. You see them here on the screen. If you live here in the Gorge and you see them around town, I hope that you thank them with your mouth or your money, or you just follow their lead in future seasons. Anything you can do to help this community program thrive the way it has, thanks to these folks you see on your screen, many who've been with us for 12 years. And so I can't say enough about how much we really do rely on folks like you see on your screen, but also so many of you who tune in and take the time to donate when you can, or at least spread the word to other folks who may not know about Sense of Place. That really means a lot. So thank you. And thank you also to Mount Adams Institute. They are a local nonprofit doing work here locally and nationwide. They have a number of programs connecting all sorts of different people to the natural to the natural world in different ways. And we are fortunate to be one of those programs. And so check them out if you get a chance. Now, on to bees. I am psyched. I got to talk to Frances many months ago, and it was clear from almost as soon as she got on the phone that this was a passion of hers. And so I'm excited that she gets to talk with us about it tonight. Frances lives here in Hood River on a pear orchard with her husband. By day, she's a land trust coordinator for Friends of the Gorge, but she is also a local organizer for the Oregon Bee Atlas, which you're going to hear more about tonight. She is going to give us a little bit of insight into the hundreds of different native bee types that we have there in the Pacific Northwest. We'll get a chance to meet some of those a little more up close and personal. We'll learn why these pollinators are so important to our daily life, whether we realize it or not, and also what we can do to help them survive. Frances studied ecology and entomology at Montana State University. She looked at, I'm going to want to get this right here, plant-pollinator interactions, and she also studied climate change. And she is going to tell us what we are maybe missing or what we see every day when we're out and about walking and working in our gardens. So I'm going to invite Frances on now. And as she joins us, I'll remind you all that following Frances's presentation, we will be able to have a Q&A session. So if during the course of her presentation, questions come up or things you want to know more about, go down to the bottom of your screen, type it in the Q&A box. And at the end, we'll get through as many of those as we can. It's one of my favorite parts. And Frances is ready for you. So thank you so much for joining us. You're in a beautiful location, I can tell. And I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. Okay, I'll just start us off. So thanks for the introduction. I'll introduce myself one more time. I'm Frances Fischer. I'm excited to be speaking with y'all tonight. This is probably my favorite topic. I'm excited to share it with you all. A little about me. I'm fourth year Hood Riverite. I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee. I've always loved insects and the small parts of the outdoors. You can see me in high school, a picture of me on the right, looking at my beehive. I was really into honeybees in high school, and I even kept a hive, but I found out a little too late that I'm actually allergic. I got stung on the face and hand once when I was digging in my hive, and they were there's a lot of them midsummer, beekeepers, they get pretty big in the midsummer. And I had a delayed reaction. So the next day I was working at my summer job, which was actually a daycare. And all the kids started freaking out and pointing at me, and one started crying. And I was I just didn't know what was happening. I looked in the mirror and my face had, I swear it was like an orange or a grapefruit on my face. My eye was swollen. My mouth was almost shut. My hand, I couldn't close it all the way. And thankfully, I went to the doctor, it was all fine. No breathing problems, but I was glad it was summer break because I stayed swollen for about a month. It was really embarrassing. So I switched over to native bees. I love honeybees too, but I like to stay a safe distance. Like Sarah said, I went to school at Montana State University and I studied ecology and entomology. And I met a pear farmer who brought me to Hood River. I work for Friends of the Columbia Gorge, which is a conservation nonprofit, as their land trust coordinator. And part of my job is stewarding land that we own as a land trust and bringing out volunteers to help control invasive weeds and build back habitat on public land in the gorge and our own land trust. You may know of our land trust land if you've been to places like Mosier Plateau and Wild Cherry Orchard. Here's a picture of me collecting at Mosier Plateau. I'm also a regional organizer for the Oregon Bee Atlas. The Oregon Bee Atlas is a citizen science project through Oregon State University, where volunteers are trained to collect bees on natural landscapes to help create an inventory of the state's native bees and what flowers they prefer. And this is super important as a data set for understanding what bees we have here and to use as a database for future research. Here on the right is a photo of some volunteers from the Oregon Bee Atlas collecting on Mosier Plateau. Friends of the Gorge and the Oregon Bee Atlas and the Oregon Bee Project, they all do great conservation work, but we don't have time to go into all that today. So please reach out to me or look us up on the internet. I think there'll be some links after this presentation. So check us out. So just to get us introduced, what is a bee? Bees are flying insects closely related to ants and wasps. Bees actually evolved from wasps about 120 to 130 million years ago, around the time that flowers first started showing up as well. Flowers and bees co-evolved into a mutually beneficial relationship where bees get food from the flower and the flower gets pollinated when the bee moves its pollen to another flower of the same species. And successful pollination allows plants to reproduce healthy fruits and seeds. Bees differ from wasps in many ways, but the most important is that bees are covered in hair and have pollen collecting hair-like structures called scopa. So you can see them here. You probably recognize pollen baskets on honeybees and bumblebees. You can kind of see the hairs even on this bumblebee on the right bottom. And other bees collect it in other places. So this is a leafcutter bee, and she's carrying her pollen on her abdomen. This yellow section is just a lot of little furry hairs, and we'll see a little bit of that close up later. And wasps, on the other hand, they may eat nectar and pollen for energy, but they feed their young meat, usually other insects. Oh, and yeah, so bees will carry their pollen back to their young like this in this bumblebee hive. So, evolution of pollination. It may not be, I just think this is a really interesting thing. So I really wanted to share it just to get us in the right place. This is the Cretaceous period. So the Cretaceous period was a time when there's the T-Rex and big dinosaurs and a time before flowering plants. So all plants that existed on Earth were wind or self-pollinated. Now this is around 125 million years ago, super long ago. In the early Cretaceous period, around 125 million years ago, a new kind of plant reproduction emerged with the first flower, which scientists believe was a magnolia. So similar to what you see on the East Coast on the right here. Then suddenly there was an explosion of plant diversity and a creation of a lineage of plants that we know today as flowering angiosperms. Evolution is the slow change in characteristics of a species over time, over several generations through natural selection, so a long time. But this was an explosion, a sudden change in the fossil record that led to the creation of 90% of the plants that we know today. And this caused it just really confused scientists in the early study of evolution. Actually, Charles Darwin wrote a letter about his confusion. Why was there this huge explosion in the Cretaceous period? It almost undermined his research. But we now know that this explosion was caused by the emergence of bees and the start of the relationship between bees and flowers that we know today as pollination. So today we have this incredible rich diversity in flowers, pollination, flowers, pollinators, and the relationships between them. 90%, like I said, 90% today of the plants we know today are flowering plants. These relationships are so much more than humans can see. Flowers are built in specific ways with specific mechanisms for pollination. Some flowers can only be correctly pollinated by a specific species of pollinator. And you can see this a little bit in your own garden, or at least groups of pollinators. So you can see some of these bees may be on sunflowers or balsam root or flat rose-like flowers. These ones may have shorter tongues, so they can't really get into these deeper flowers that may need a different kind of bee that can get into something like a lupin flower and open up those petals and get deep inside. So, bumblebees, they're the only ones that can pollinate tomatoes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And a lot of these big red flowers that you see that are hummingbird attractors, and you have red flowers on your hummingbird feeders. It's because that color is associated with long tubed flowers that need to be pollinated by something with a long tongue, like a butterfly or a moth or a hummingbird. In fact, bees can't see red, so they would completely miss out on this flower anyways, because that's not what that flower is trying to tell them, not trying to attract them. Flowers even look different to bees. Let's see, in this image, like I said, they can't see red. They can see, we think, around like maybe some yellows, blues, and greens in ultraviolet light. So in this image, you can see on the left, as a human would see it, and on the right too, these two images were created to display what flowers would look like if we could see with ultraviolet light, like bees. So you can see that the flower looks a lot different, and it almost looks like a bullseye to tell the bee where to land to pollinate the flower. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a really high level example of like how specific the relationship between flower and bee can get with millions of years of evolution, and just the interactions cause little changes over millions of years and lead to what we have today. Now, orchids are known for their very specialized interactions with bees. We have quite a few orchid species here in the gorge. This orchid is actually not a gorge native. This is actually, there's quite a few of these species in Europe, including this one from the UK. But I just had to give this example. It's really cool. So this flower is the bee orchid, and this flower isn't trying to talk to bees and say, hey, come to me, and I'm going to give you a big snack. I'm going to give you some pollen and nectar to drink. This flower is actually tricking bees. That's its strategy. So what it's trying to do is what we call modified sepal. It looks like the back, especially under UV light. It looks exactly a mirror image of the back of a female of a specific species of bee, specifically a longhorn or a bee with long antenna that you'll see in the video in a second. So this looks like the back of a female bee, and it also smells, the smell that comes out of it doesn't say yummy nectar. It smells like the exact smell of pheromones from this specific species of female bee. So it's trying to trick male bees of this species to try to mate with the flower. And so what happens is on this side image of the flower, you can see this green piece, this modified petal sepal that's arching over, or pistil that's arching over. And these are the pollen structures. And underneath the pollen structures, you can see these little green globs. So this is the anther with the pollen. And these green globs are sticky glue that detaches from the flower. So what happens is the bee tries to come and attempts to mate with the flower, and the movements cause this mechanism to bend over and stick onto the back of the bee. And then it flies off and brings the pollen all with it to the next flower to pollinate it. So I just wanted to show you a quick video of this. So here's the modified sepal again, the part of the flower that looks like the female bee. And you're gonna see this male bee furiously trying to mate with this flower, this poor bee, and you can see these green globs. Those are the green glue globs that are going to bring out the pollen. And then this other male bee tries to mate, he fights it off, but he's got like bunny ears of pollen that are stuck back of its head by that glue, and he's gonna fly off and try to mate with another flower and probably pollinate it successfully. I just think that's hilarious, and I have to share that one because it cracks me up every time. Okay, so that's just how specific evolution can get, you know? After all that, those years, they can get really specific species to species. So bees, there's about 20,000 of them worldwide. In the Pacific Northwest, about 800 to 900. We think there's at least 500 in Oregon, at least 600 in Washington. So we have a lot of bees. I can't tell you about each bee in the gorge, but I want to give you as much information as possible and hopefully inspire you to learn more. So these creatures are so beautiful, diverse, and important, and they are just as interesting and exciting to see as an elk or an eagle. You just need to look a little bit closer. The picture you see on the bottom left is a picture that displays the incredible diversity of bees. So the left is the smallest group of bees in the US. It's a fairy bee, and the right is the huge carpenter bee. So you can just see from the same group of animals, you can have such diversity, especially when you've got thousands of species. So why are they important to the gorge? Lots of reasons, I'm sure you know. So bees pollinate the vast majority of the crops in the gorge. That means all of our orchard fruit that you get on the Fruit Loop, as well as strawberries, blueberries, squash, and most all of our other produce. We call the bee and other pollinators keystone species because they are vital to maintaining healthy ecosystems. They are essential for plant reproduction and produce genetic diversity in plants that they pollinate. The more diverse that plants are, the better they are at weathering changes in the environment. They are also the reason that we have the insanely beautiful array of wildflowers that we have here in the gorge. If you've ever been to the gorge in the spring and looked closely, it's like a colorful and very busy city where thousands of bees are hopping from flower to flower. And this brings people from all over to the gorge and stimulates our economy. Finally, bees are ultimately protecting our natural resources, keeping our soils rich and our air and water clean. So just to nail home how important bees are to our food systems, here's an image on the left that shows our produce selection when we have bees pollinating and our produce selection without bees. So we have a lot less choices with foods without them. And these are just some graphics of the crops that we have in Oregon and Washington. And if you look, the majority of them are pollinated by bees, and our bees are needed, including, there's one thing that you should know is alfalfa that we grow, especially not really in the gorge, but in the rest of Oregon and Washington, is fed to cattle and poultry and feeds them as well. So that contributes to our crops in that way too. I bet when you see stickers and signs that say save the bees, you think of the honeybee, but I want you after this presentation to think of native bees as well. So honeybees are, of course, important to pollination for agriculture, but honeybees only supplement the work of native pollinators. And a lot of crops actually, specialist pollinators do a better job than generalist honeybees. And when I say generalist, I mean that a honeybee has been bred to attempt to pollinate with any kind of flower that it comes in contact with, but that doesn't mean that it'll do the job well. And some native bees are specialists, which means they specialize on specific species of plants and have co-evolved with that plant to perfectly pollinate it. For example, blueberries are native to the Pacific Northwest, and they have evolved with the blueberry bee, which is a kind of bumblebee. This kind of bee is perfectly designed to pollinate the blueberry effectively. In fact, blueberry bee pollination creates twice as much fruit as honeybee bees do in blueberries. We also have the squash bee here on the right. Honeybees aren't physically big enough to successfully pollinate a squash, and they really need a squash bee, which has been co-evolved with it again for millions of years so that it can pollinate it. They have those huge flowers, if you remember. Also, honeybees aren't physically big enough to pollinate tomatoes. It takes bumblebees buzz pollination, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And that's the same with similar types of flowers like shooting stars that you see outside. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on first foods. First foods are plants and animal species that have long been a central part of the diet and culture of indigenous people. Honeybees and other managed bees were brought to the gorge after colonization. All first foods are most effectively pollinated by native bees. Here you can see a native sweat bee pollinating the very important camas, and on the right, a picture of the delicious huckleberry. And these are all pollinated by native bees. When a bumblebee feeds on the nectar and pollen of a huckleberry flower, it pollinates the flower, which produces food eaten by songbirds, grizzly bears, and dozens of other animals, and also humans. So, like I said, I can't talk about the hundreds of individual bee species in the gorge, but I want to highlight the diversity of the bees that we have in the gorge in Oregon and Washington, as well as touch on some interesting species, including species that we've collected with the Oregon Bee Atlas at Moser Plateau. There'll be pictures that have a comment under them that we've collected them at Moser. And I also wanted to briefly check in with taxonomy for a second so that I can clear any confusion. We use what we call taxonomic units to classify different species. Today, we're talking about families, which is a way of grouping bees based on their physical and genetic features. So when I say family, I'm talking about a group of bee species, and there are 5 families in the Pacific Northwest. Okay, so I may have mentioned the term generalist and specialist previously. These terms are just loose categorizations for bees. Generalist bees can collect pollen and nectar from a wide variety of plant species, while specialists may only be able to collect pollen from a single family, genus, or species of plants. A bumblebee and a honeybee are generalists and can collect food from many kinds of flowers. But some species, on the other hand, are so specified that they only get food from one specific flower species or group of species. This could be because of physical attributes, like having a long tongue, like you see up here, or a short tongue, which means you can only get pollen and nectar from a specific kind of flower, usually composite flowers. One specialist bee to note, which I think is really cool, is the lava hole bee. And you can see it right here. This is kind of the only picture we have of it. This bee was rediscovered in Oregon by the Oregon Bee Atlas taxonomist Lincoln Bess in 2018. It's super exciting because it wasn't documented for 100 years before that. It's a bee that lives on lava beds and collects pollen only from penstemon flowers. You see penstemon like Barrett's penstemon. This picture I think was taken at Rowena. So it collects only pollen and nectar from this plant specifically. So it collects penstemon pollen, creates a single pollen ball that it then takes and places in the tiny holes in lava rock created from gas bubbles in the cooling lava from an eruption eons ago. You can't get more specialized than that. I just think that's amazing. So you can really see how an environment and millions of years can create such a specific and intricate interaction, and a bee that could only exist in a very specific place. It's just really cool, and we have them here. So bees go through complete metamorphosis, just like butterflies and frogs. At the top here, you can see the general life cycle. An egg is laid, and then that grows into a larva, which is fed pollen by a adult bee, or it feeds on pollen, that a pollen source that's been left for it. Then it closes itself up, just like a butterfly or a caterpillar in a cocoon, and goes through metamorphosis. And then after it's done changing, an adult bee emerges. To go through these bees go through this life cycle either socially or solitary. You have probably heard of social bees like honeybees with their big hives and a queen. Just like honeybees, bumblebees have little hives too, where they have a queen and her daughter workers working to raise little baby bees. But other than that, most bees are solitary or somewhere in between social and solitary, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. So let's use the blue orchard bee as an example. So the blue orchard bee, it's a very important bee for our orchard fruit out here in the gorge. It's really, I mean, look how beautiful that is. That is a bright blue metallic bee. I wish my nail polish looked like that. It's so pretty. So this solitary bee, what being a solitary bee means is that a single mother, like the mason bee, it's called the blue orchard mason bee. It's got a long name. So this blue orchard mason bee, it's a solitary bee, which means that a single mother is born, mates, and then works tirelessly for the rest of its life to collect pollen and set up a nest. The nest will have, this is the nest right here. So for a mason bee, the nest will have individual cells with a pollen source and a single egg laid on it. And then that bee will die. The adult bee will die, and the egg will grow into an adult bee and have everything it needs to grow up on its own the following year. So you can see that nest, and I just wanted to share this video just to kind of show you briefly like what the life cycle looks like. So here we have the blue orchard mason bee. She's collecting pollen, you can see using her back legs and collecting it on her scopa, on the back of her legs, on the back of her abdomen, those really structured hairs. She collects the pollen and flies back to her nest. This is a kind of like a bee hotel. So this is a man-made nest. And this is her pollen source. She's making a big pollen ball, and this one's purple because it's feeding on a specific flower. She lays a single egg, and then she packs, she's a mason bee, and they get that name because they pack mud and clay to make little walls between each cell. So it's kind of like a little apartment for her kids. And then she seals that up. What a beautiful bee. She's sealing that up with more mud and clay to pack it in and seal them in for the next year. And she's done, her work is done. And new babies are going to come out of that. It's so cute. So then that egg, so each one of these purple blobs represents an egg. That egg is going to hatch into a larva. And that larva, like you see here, is going to chew that pollen and grow and change. So tiny and grow and change until it spins itself into a cocoon. So here's a cocoon. This specific bee species does a little silk one. Then it's going to pupate over, usually over the winter, and an adult bee chews its way out of its little cocoon right here and emerges as for her new life to make a new one. How cute is that? And then she is going to fly out of her nest and go pollinate some pears, I guess. So cool. What a cute bee. Okay. So on to the next, nesting strategies. So that was just one example of how bees nest in a tube with mud. That's a mason bee. So let's talk about how other bees pull this off. So 70% of North American bees are ground nesters. So they construct a diverse array of underground tunnels and chambers. So you can see bumblebees, they have a big social nest where there's a bunch of bumblebees together raising young, and they're usually underground or in a cavity. Then you also have solitary bees like this mining bee. So she's dug up this nest, and each one of these little orange balls represents an egg and larva, and each one of these little chambers has a baby that's going to come out of it. Other species use pre-existing holes or holes that are bored into wood. So the carpenter bee, they'll bore right into wood and make their own hole. And then other bees, like you saw the mason bee, or this is another bee of the same family, a leafcutter bee, who's making a nest in a hole that already existed. And then some bees will, other species will utilize hollow or pithy stems, such as berry canes, like rose or elderberry, and put their, this one's got bamboo on, and put their nests in hollow canes. And then while others will build mud turrets or fill crevices and cliff faces. And honestly, though, a lot of bees aren't picky. They are nesting in, they will nest wherever they find a safe spot. And in rare cases, some species will utilize things like snail shells or crevices or holes in coral that's been tossed up on the beach. The nesting sites and structures are almost as diverse as the bee species themselves. It's pretty crazy. You'll find them nesting in like a little hole inside your house, or really everywhere. So like I said, they're everywhere. This isn't a very high quality photo, but it just kind of demonstrates where you'll find them outside, like in the ground, in an old stump, in old stems from last year, in the ground, again, a big bumblebee nest, or maybe in a cavity. So finally, the families, mining bees, Adrenidae. So this bee is this family of bees. They are ground nesters, like I showed you earlier. You might see these in the spring, little, almost looks like an anthill, but there's bees coming out of it, probably a solitary bee nest. These are important because, we have some that specialize on prunus plants like cherries and stone fruit. So that's important for us out here in the gorge. And this species actually perfectly pollinates the Rocky Mountain bee plant. So it's really important for that species. Okay, one of my favorites, leaf cutting bees. This is the same group that we saw the blue orchard bee. So here she is again, coming out of her mud nest. So they're known for having these big teeth, these big mandibles that they use to, guess what? Leaf cut. So I just wanted to show you how they use those big chomping mandibles. So this is a leaf cutter bee. She is, oh, dang it. I messed up. We have an ad. Well, anyway, maybe I'll share my screen over here again. Okay, well, we'll try to get that going. But they have these big mandibles that they use to cut leaves, and they'll make nests out of it. So here, I'll show you again. Let's try this again. So here you can see her. She is just using those teeth to cut so quickly, to cut a perfect little circle. Well, this one's not so perfect. To cut a circle in the leaf and carry it back to her nest. So she'll come back to her nest and go into a cavity and create these little tube nests where she uses the leaf to partition off each of the nest cells. So then let's see what else we have for them. You know, there's, oh yeah, okay, so the wool carder bee. So this is another really cool species in this group. This species right here, she's going to use those cutting mandibles to cut off woolly trichomes or little hairs on the surface of leaves of woolly plants like a mullein or a rabbit's, what other ones are there? Lamb's ears or hairy plants. And she's going to take those hairy trichomes and turn them into a little hairy nest, a little woolly nest. So it kind of looks like a bee snuggie. It's pretty cute. Okay, so then there's the plaster bees, the Clitoridae. A lot of them are really small, and look how cute that is. That's a cute bee. That one looks like it's wearing a pashmina. Very cute. So these bees, they don't actually carry pollen to their nest on structures on scopa. They actually eat it and regurgitate it like a bird, which is kind of cool. They make this cellophane type wrapper in their, they are ground nesters, and they can make their cells waterproof with this cellophane that they create out of pollen and enzymes in their stomach. So that's really cool. Also, okay, so sweat bees. These are really beautiful type of bee. They're kind of known as a lot of times they're called, there are some species called metallic sweat bees. They're really beautiful. A lot of them are ground nesters. Sometimes they can have even a queen. They have some interesting social strategies. And then also, I just wanted to show this video. Now, this isn't specific to sweat bees, but I just think it's a really beautiful video to demonstrate what these bees, this is a slow motion of her, she's passing pollen from her front legs to her back legs where she's going to carry it back home. And she's just gorgeous, that beautiful color. And what she's doing is, it's just what it'd be like to have 6 legs. I mean, she's passing that pollen from front to back so that she can keep it on her hairs and take it back to her nest. She's wiping it off her face. Wow, I just think she's really pretty. I just think if you see that video and you're not impressed, then you're not going to like these, because I think that is just gorgeous. Okay, so wait 1 second. All right, so next up is Apidae. So this is the last family. This family is where you find honeybees and bumblebees and also carpenter bees. And it's a really important species group. There's also the sunflower bee. Here's one from Mosier. These ones you'll see if you're in your garden and you see things like a sunflower or balsam root. They really like those kinds of flowers, and you'll notice them pretty fast because they have these super long antennae. They're known as longhorn bees. And they also are the same group that was trying to mate with that orchid, which is kind of funny. And also the squash bee on the bottom left here, super important. Like I said, it's the only pollinator of squash, so very important. Also, we have the digger bee. So this one's called the, what is it called again? Oh yeah, the silver dune digger bee. Kind of a long name, but we don't have them here, but they do. We have them at the coast, and I think they're really cool. They dig a hole in sand dunes, and nest in sand dunes, which is really interesting. We also have, this is one of the species that, especially the carpenter bees, they like to go in the stem. So they're pretty cool. Okay, let's see. Okay, so bumblebees. Bumblebees are in the family Apidae, but they are just so cool. I wanted to cover them. So first of all, if you live in the gorge, then or you don't know this, but you're in a really good place if you like bumblebees. We have some of the highest diversity of bumblebees in the US. We have so many, especially just some really cool bees. Here's a couple of them we found at Mosier Plateau. So they're really cool. They live in colonies. There can be between 50 and 400 individuals in a colony, which is really cool. They also can control their body temperature, which most bees can't do. Usually you only see bees in the middle of the day, but because they get too cold. But bumblebees, they're so big, they can regulate their own body heat. So they can go out in the early morning and the late afternoon, which is kind of cool. And they're also capable of buzz pollination, which I talked about at the very beginning. Buzz pollination is super important for our crops and our ecosystem. And they're the only kind of bee that can do it. So here's a video of buzz pollination. So what she's doing, this is a bumblebee, she is grabbing onto the anthers of the flower and vibrating her body. And what she's doing is pulling all that pollen out by vibrating, shaking it all out. And she's the only bee that's big enough to do it. Oh, wow. So look at this side angle. You can see that she is just kind of shaking it all over her body. And then later she's going to pack it in on her scopa to bring back to her hive. Just so cool and super important. All right. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on cuckoo bees. These are really cool. Little, I guess, sly. They're also called kleptoparasites. They're not a specific group of bees. There's different ones in each, and in 3 families in our area. And so there's quite a few species, and they are like cuckoo birds. What they do is they go and I'll actually show you a video of that one too, because it's kind of cool. So they go and wait out for a bee. Actually, no, let me just show you now. So you're gonna see, this is so that's a leaf cutter bee. She's going to build her nest. So there he is. There's she. This is a kleptoparasite, a cuckoo bee. She's sitting there waiting patiently for that lady bee to leave. So that leaf cutter bee, she went and she's packing in her pollen. She lays her egg, and that one is waiting very suspiciously when the leaf cutter bee leaves. She runs in there, lays an egg, and then that egg is going to hatch earlier than the egg of the leaf cutter bee. Then that cuckoo bee egg is going to kill the leaf cutter bee larva, eat all the pollen, and then emerge early enough in the spring. So it probably is going to kill the rest of the bees that are in that, there she is coming back, she has no idea, that are in that nest. And what she's doing, basically, this cuckoo bee, is making it so that she is not having to do as much work as the mother leaf cutter bee is doing. So she is kind of skimping out. She doesn't have to work as hard, and then she can just kind of hang out. Okay, so just briefly, let's get into native bee decline. So unfortunately, native bees are being negatively affected by humans because of habitat loss, exposure to some pesticides, introduced diseases, competition with introduced species, including the honeybee, climate change. Bees are super diverse. Some are generalists and some are specialists that can only feed on specific kinds of flowers. So have any of you hikers noticed flowers earlier? If you go out in the spring and maybe, that grass widow, I normally see it in March, it's February, or so on and so forth. So new term, big one, it'll impress people at parties, I swear, at least entomologist parties. Phenological mismatch. So phenological mismatch is a term we use to talk about how bees and flowers miss each other because of climate change. So some bees are only around for a short time, just like flowers. And again, just like flowers, they emerge at different times of the year based on different factors, including rising temperature, snowmelt, and daylight hours. Okay, so for example, say a flower and a bee have been evolving together for millions of years. The bee perfectly pollinates that flower, and the flower is that bee's main source of food because the bee is specialized to that plant. The flower grows and blooms based on temperature, and historically it blooms in May. But the bee emerges based on daylight hours, so which is consistent every year, no matter the climate. So normally they're around at the same time, but with climate change, the flower blooms earlier and there's no bee around to pollinate it perfectly. The flower is less reproductively successful and it'll die back for the year. And then finally, when the bee emerges, its favorite flower has already passed. That bee becomes less reproductively successful or even starves. This is just a specific example of thousands of possible mismatches between pollinators and plants caused by climate change. It's a big concept. I think it's really interesting. And it kind of brings into context when there's all these flowers and all these bees, what's the break part with climate change? There's so many flowers. How are they dying out? Well, things like this. So what can you do? What can you do to save the bees? So first, on your land, you can try to have something blooming all year. That's really important. Plant native plants. Have a diverse array of different pollinators, and try not to spray insecticides if you can. If you need to spray insecticides, read the label, because on that label on the back of the spray, you're going to find information on when to spray to avoid causing death of bees or important beneficial insects. So you might spray earlier in the morning, or how much you need to spray just decreases your likelihood of causing harm to bees. So leave bare ground. You saw all of those ground nesting bees, and they really need some bare ground to build their nests. So, and also when you see bare ground, leave it, kind of watch it, because yeah, if you leave bare ground, bees are always looking for it. So you might see a nest the next year. So you might want to avoid mulch or weed cloth in certain areas. Leave the stems and leaves, so it's good habitat. I talked about stem nesting bees. If you need to cut the stems, cut them at 18 to 20 inches from the ground, and then whatever you cut off, bundle them up and put them away. Don't put them in the compost. There might already be bees in there, and put them away so that bees can use them as a nest, like bundle them up, kind of put them to the side. Consider a bee lawn. You might see them in a park. You see clover or English daisy or Roman chamomile, and this is it's an all year round food source. So it's it's a lot better than having a bunch of Idaho fescue. There's just no food there for bees. Native flower window box. If you don't live in a house with a yard, you live in an apartment, maybe have a window box with native plants. It's beautiful, and you might see some bees. And then water sources. So you have a water source out for birds, like a bird bath, or you want to put one out for bees, make sure to put like rocks or water or marbles in it so that the bees can have something to perch on. Otherwise they might drown, but they are really looking for water, especially in the dry times of the year. Last thing to note, bee hotels are becoming increasingly popular, and they're really great, but you have to clean them. So if you don't clean them over years, parasites just know that there's a bee nest there, and there's always going to be bees there. So there's more parasites, more diseases. So it's prone to fungal infections, all kinds of things. So what you can do is get one or make one that's easy to clean. Make sure all the bees are flown out and out for the year, and then you can check online with how to clean them. Okay, so here's a garden, just kind of a visual of what you could do. So you can have your down wood that you leave for carpenter bees and bees that nest in cavities. You have your stems bundled up. You have things blooming all year round, some bare ground. So just kind of, it's a little bit messier. It's really pretty. It kind of makes you like your shabby chic for your gardens, but it's really good for bees. So I talked about planting native species and planting stuff that blooms all year round, and this can throw people off. It's a lot of research. So one thing I wanted to note is you're going to see a lot of pollinator mixes and wildflower mixes in garden stores, but those don't mean they're native, and they might even be invasive. I was so annoyed. I was at the dentist and I was looking at it through a garden magazine, and I saw this. So plants to plant in the fall in the Pacific Northwest, and it lists non-natives that are naturalized well. bachelor's button and Queen Anne's lace. Well, Queen Anne's lace for sure, and bachelor button at least second. Queen Anne's lace is an invasive species, and that will just completely it could really ruin your land. So you really don't want to introduce those kind of species. So when you're getting like packets like that, make sure to read up on what the species they're including are. And that doesn't mean you have to only plant native species to feed bees. They definitely like other species too, but just try not to introduce some invasive species to your land. And it can be overwhelming. Oregon State University made this list of bees that bloom all year round, and then I added quite a few that do really well or are native to our specific area in the gorge. This is available, this PDF, and I think that it'll be in a link after the video. So it has the species, time of year, it's noted if it's native or if you can get a species that's available that's native, and it also has bee lawn species that you could add to your lawn. Last thing, save the bees with your resources. Tell your friends about the importance of bees. I know I do all the time, and I hope you do too after this. You can donate to your local conservation groups, advocate for land conservation and climate action in your community, volunteer for local conservation nonprofits. This is a picture of some invasive weed pulling we're doing after the fire, after the Eagle Creek fire on the Oregon side. There's some volunteers from Friends of the Columbia Gorge. And also you could join the Oregon Bee Atlas. If you're interested in this information, you want to learn more, check them out. They're really great. I want to add one more thing. I obviously love this stuff. I think it's great. I hope you do too after this. And I really think it's important for people to take time when you're outside to look for the small things. So next time you're outside, maybe when the snow melts, take time to sit quietly 10-15 minutes and watch the insect world around you. It doesn't have to be bees. You can bring a magnifying glass, just see what's going on. There's so many cool animals that are underneath us that we just don't pay attention to because they're small, but they're just as cool as the big stuff. So I just wanted to share that. So that's all I have. Here's some cute little bumblebee butts. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks so much for letting me talk tonight.
Thank you, Frances. I love the bumblebee butts. Well, people are adding questions and I want to have them keep coming in. I want to lead off by following up on what you just said about when we're out and about taking the time to look. Are there maybe, 2 or 3 things that you could tell me that when I'm out and about, I could tell like my kids, like look for a leaf that's cut like this, or look for this, pretty specific thing that I could say that's evidence of a bee? Oh, you muted yourself, I think.
Sorry, I knew I was going to do that. I said a couple things you can do. So one, if you do have flowers, especially like some of the big showy ones like a lupin or a balsam root, there's a lot of them in the springtime. Just sit by it, just sit and look at the flowers, and there's no way you won't see a bee unless it's really windy, which happens in the gorge. So watch out for that, or raining. You're going to see a bee. And then as for what to look for, just in general with insects, if you see things like that look unnatural, like a leaf that's kind of rolled or a pile of dirt or a pile of rocks somewhere, if you look closely, you might see some movement and you notice that there's something going on, like something rolled up in the leaf that's making a nest, or if you see holes in the leaves that are perfectly circular, it's probably a leafcutter bee.
Someone's asking here, and I'm curious about this too. Do you recommend then not cultivating honeybees because they may compete with the native bees or spread disease? And if that's the case, are there ways to mitigate this damage if we still want to have honey? So
honeybees are especially since, I'm a little bit, I have a little bit of PTSD from high school. Not really, but I
Your
definitely
face looks great.
Thank you. They're kind of like cows, and cows are really important to humans. So it's, perfect world, we would just have native bees pollinating everything, but we wouldn't have the food systems that we have today. So honeybees are really important, but it depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to pollinate crops? Are you trying to collect honey? If so, then honeybees are really important. But if you're trying to increase biodiversity in your yard or your land, honeybees they will do that. They will outcompete native bees especially on native plants.
Do you have a sense for what percentage of our crops here in the gorge are pollinated by native bees versus honeybees?
I don't know about the percentage, but bumblebees, all of our nightshades, so tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, bumblebees, they're pollinated by bumblebees. Blueberries are pollinated by blueberry bees. And then native bees really do pollinate like all of our crops. We just bring in honeybees to supplement, to make sure every single flower is pollinated. But if you didn't bring a honeybee hive to a orchard, for instance, you would see some honeybees from other hives, but you see other bees, native bees on our crops as well.
Let's see. I think this overlaps. I'm just going to read out loud so you can walk through it with me. Do native bees pollinate the pear and fruit and other crops, or do the growers always need to bring in other bees? It sounds like it's a mix of both.
It's a mix. So, there's a lot of native bees on orchards. But like I said, the reason you bring in honeybees isn't because native bees can't pollinate the trees. It's just that they're trying to get as big as a crop yield as they can get. And when they bring in honeybees, they're guaranteeing that a ton of all the flowers are going to be pollinated, which may not be true if you just have the native bees around.
Okay, so we love bees now. We're all going to be looking for them and doing things to cultivate them. And then we're out at our picnic table in the summer and there are wasps. Are you aware? I know wasps is not what you're here to talk about, but how do we mitigate for the wasps, but then cultivate the bees?
So they're really different. So like one thing I'll say is if you've got a big hornet's nest in your yard, you're not going to ruin biodiversity by getting rid of that hornet's nest. They're different. So there's a lot of the wasps that are bothering you are a specific kind of wasp. There's also really cool wasps that aren't going to bother you. Some of them don't have stings. Some of them are pollinators. A lot of them just don't even interact with humans, but you're probably going to interact with yellow jackets and things that are going to try to eat your food. And they usually are social. So there's a lot of them. So if you kill one, you don't need to feel so bad.
Okay, maybe this is a silly question. Do all these 500 plus native bees, do they all sting?
No. So a lot of them don't. So bumblebees do, but really, I got stung by a bumblebee one time and I was asking for it, and I'm around bees a lot. That is the only native bee sting I've ever gotten, and I'm like catching them with a net and putting them in a jar. So a lot of bees don't. Most leafcutter bees don't. So there's one managed bee, the alfalfa leafcutter bee, and you'll see videos of farmers just holding handfuls of little bees, and they don't have stings at all. So no.
Got it. Let's see. So for these bees that nest way underground, how did and they're using light to determine when they come out. How does that work if they're way underground in the dark?
So it depends on the species. So that was a very specific example. A lot of bees are coming out because of heat, but just how warm it is. But I can't think of a specific species that's daylight, but I'm thinking ones that are in stems or in places that are exposed to light, they're going to but I didn't mention it. They have 2 eyes and then they have 3 photoreceptor eyes on the tops of their heads. And when they, that's kind of what's triggering their emergence.
Is those 3 eyes. That's, oh man. Okay, speaking of cool physical characteristics or physical things, you gotta tell us about the bee dancing.
That is a honeybee trait. So that's only for honeybees. And I actually, not to be a nerd, but I saw the question and it asked, how do bees communicate? And the question it said smell was listed. Actually, bees communicate mostly with smell. The dance is specific to honeybees, and what they're doing is, and they actually are using smell at the same time. They come back to the hive, they are releasing smell chemicals, telling the other bees that, oh my gosh, I just found this amazing thing, come look. And then they're doing a dance to show the distance and the general direction of where the food source is. And then it'll take a bunch of bees back with it.
No way. This
Yeah,
is like a
pretty
GPS
cool.
dance.
Yeah, exactly. It's like drawing a map with their little bodies.
That's amazing. What's the lifespan of some of our native bees? They live a year, less, more?
So kind of hard to, so first of all, it's different for different bees, but it's interesting. It depends on what you call life, I guess. But yes, a lot of them live like a year. So they'll live like 8 months in that larva and then pupate state. So when they're in their nest eating pollen and then turning into adult bees. And then in the spring, some of them only live for a few weeks, like 3, 4, 5 weeks, and or even shorter, where their adult life where they're flying around collecting pollen is pretty short compared to their longer life as babies, just locked up in their little crib cell.
So they get out and get the job done.
They get out, get the job done.
Let's see. Okay, so we've got all these, I drive past the blueberry fields. We have so many of them here in the valley. Do we have naturally occurring blueberry bees here specifically?
Yes, yep. Yes, we do. And I'm trying to think, some blueberry farmers will bring in managed bumblebees that they keep. They're kind of like in a box, you can order them. And some of them aren't native, so they'll use those as well. But the native blueberry bee is like the best thing you can get. Honeybees, actually, they're really bad at pollinating blueberries because they don't have they just aren't able to get it out like with buzz pollination like bumblebees do. So what they do instead, and they do this with a lot of flowers that they're not good at pollinating, same with like tomatoes, is they nectar rob. So what they'll do is it's a word, nectar robbing is what they do. They can't get the pollen, so they'll cut a hole at the base of the flower and suck out the nectar without actually pollinating it. So that's why we can't use honeybees for flowers like that.
Okay, so that would be something you could also look for, like one of those physical plant characteristics if I was trying to keep that.
Yes, definitely. Watch a honeybee when it tries to pollinate stuff like that. Doesn't do very well.
You get naughty sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking for ways to sort of connect this sort of thing to my children. So bear with me on this question. If I see something and it looks like bee and it's got fuzz on it, is that, if I see fuzz, does that always equal pollinator?
I would say for the most part, but I wish I could have gotten into this. I could talk about bees forever. There's a ton of specifically flies that mimic bees. It'll look just like a bumblebee, and only an entomologist is gonna, oh, that's a fly, because of it's the way it looks. So there's some fuzzy, they look for sure that's a bumblebee and it's a fly. So I guess no. And then there's also these things that are in the same family as bees and wasps called velvet ants, and you'll see them on the ground. You're like, oh my god, that poor bee, its wings got ripped off. It's actually a velvet ant, and it looks like a little bee that just doesn't have wings. So yes and no. If it's flying on a flower, probably a bee and fuzzy.
Okay.
Could be a fly.
We'll save digging into that deeper for Frances and Bees part 2. So let's see. Someone was asking, I've got how do these specialist bees actually find their plants? So someone asked, I've got 2 squash plants growing a mile from the nearest neighbor squash plants. How if they're at the neighbor's house, do they find their way over to the other room? What sorts of things are bees doing to track that stuff?
First of all, the fact that you said squash plant makes it really a longer answer, unfortunately. So
okay, how about just
just in general, if it's a bee that specializes on a plant, most bees will nest right next to the flower. So there's a big patch of, say, Rocky Mountain bee plant. That what was it? Plaster minor bee that specializes on that is going to have all of its nests around that big patch, and then there's another big patch over here, and there's nests over there. So
they're tracking. Okay. I can't. I need to know the squash answer.
Squash answer is it's the same thing, but what's interesting about that is humans, indigenous people, brought squash up from more southern parts of the U.S. to Oregon, and it took a while for the squash bee to come up to Oregon where the squash plant was because of the mountains. So it couldn't travel. It was too long for it to travel without its food source. But eventually, and we don't even know how, the squash bee showed up over the mountain range and continued to pollinate the squash, which is really cool.
So if there are young budding entomologists out there, this could be your thesis topic, like how this bee leapfrogged its way north. Okay. Have any that we know of, any bees that we know have gone extinct due to the phenological, am I saying it right?
Phenological mismatch. Yes. So it's kind of hard to track because there's so, like I said, there's so many bees, and like 10 to 15% of the bees that we estimate exist we don't have names for them. We haven't even documented them. So there's so many, it's kind of hard to tell, especially with specialists because they're so rare. Like I said, that lava whole bee, that one, it could have been extinct for 2 years and we didn't know it. So it's kind of hard to track. But yes, there have been a few species that have gone extinct, and more than that, it's just the general declining, and we're seeing less and less of them.
How do you walk me through when you go out, maybe with Oregon Bee Atlas or one of those organizations to collect bees so you can track them and do citizen science? How does that work? You're with a net and you're running around?
Yes. So it's with a net. It's with a net, and unfortunately you have to kill them. You put them in a kill jar, and then you pen them and label them and send them to a scientist. And it sounds really dark, but trust me, it's not. The tiny sample that we're getting from a specific, like a 30-minute increment, is not damaging bee populations. And it's really important because other areas of the country have these long histories of collections of bees that they can use to compare. Okay, we have all these bees in the 1800s, but we only have this amount now. And we're a young state, and we didn't have a big entomology department going on in this area. So we don't have those collections, especially in Oregon. So it's really important to collect them now so that we can use them to study in the future.
And is that what's going on? Is that the main thrust of the Oregon Bee Atlas? Okay.
Yes, it's to collect bees across the state and see what flowers are coming on and what time of year they are so that we can use it for research.
I know a couple folks have asked about the Oregon Bee Atlas. We are going to have, I think we may already have some of the info and links on our website, and we will put more of that on the website based on what Frances shared with us tonight, including, I hope we'll get the, if we don't already have the PDF of the garden and some of the recommendations that you gave us. We'll get those on our website, so check back in with that. Let's see, and someone was asking about which OBA group you actually are a coordinator for.
Well, I kind of do the Gorge group. So there's a big Portland group, and the Gorge group is very small. And so what we've kind of started to do now is, we have our Gorge people collect as much as they can, and we kind of chat and email, and then the people that live in the Gorge. And then we try to have a big bio blitz in the spring where people come out and get people from Portland or all over Oregon to come to Mosier Plateau and other places in the Gorge to collect in the Gorge so we can get some good bees out here.
So if I was to look up in the Mosier Plateau at that point, would I just see all these people with nets walking around? Like what?
I would say like 10 to 20, not a ton. We don't want to trample the flowers, and we'd rather everyone be careful with that at our natural spaces, stay on trail when you're looking at these insects, because we don't want to trample the flowers we're trying to look at.
Got it. So let's say you have an existing lawn and you want to try to make it more bee friendly. So you don't get a plant fresh. Based on some of the stuff maybe you shared with us, do you add stuff in? What can you do to make that lawn more friendly to bees?
That one's kind of tough. I'm actually doing it right now, and it's because I'm digging up an old septic tank, so I already have a hole. But I think the best way is, you have a packet and you look at a dry, like an empty spot. There's already holes in your lawn anyway, and you plant it there and make sure to water it. Or right now, because I already have the hole, I am using just a rototiller, just restarting the lawn, because it's once it's that mat of grass, it's really hard to get those species in there, but it's really worth it. It looks a lot better. I think it's so pretty. And also you don't have to mow it as much. There's a lot of reasons to do a bee lawn.
Tell me about these cuckoo bees, because when you were talking about them, I started to not like them and I felt like they were bad. Is it not, are they just lazy or are they actually bad?
They're not bad. They're native. So it's just kind of like, is a lamprey bad? Lampreys aren't bad. They are also somewhat parasitic, but they're not bad for existing, you know. A remora on a shark. I'm sorry, I'm using very specific fish examples for some reason, but no, they're not. They're part of the biodiversity. It's just like that flower tricking the bee to mate with it. It's just another expression of evolution.
Let's see. Talk to me about, for a while, like colony collapse and bees and pesticides and all of that was in the news all the time. Where are we at now with that and the use of pesticides and what's going on positively or negatively in that direction?
Well, I would say the last thing I read, that colony collapse disorder was actually on the decline, which is great. This is specifically for honeybees. And I think the Oregon Bee Project actually started because someone in, I think it was Corvallis, was not reading their spray bottle correctly, and they sprayed a insecticide on a bunch of linden trees in Corvallis, and it killed a huge amount of bumblebees, and it actually caused a stir of like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? So I think today people are a lot more aware of it. And just as long as we're using our pesticides in an appropriate way so that we can feed ourselves and keep ourselves healthy, but not without paying attention to research and paying attention to what's on the spray bottle. And that's really important because a lot of where these instances come from nowadays, because of our laws and regulations, is because people aren't reading their labels closely, especially people that just buy it at the grocery store.
Will you tell us one more time, what are the red flags when we are reading our bottles? Or what are the... On the back,
it's going to give you for insecticides and all pesticides, it's going to give you specific instructions on how much to mix, like how much to mix with water before you spray it, what time of day to spray it, what time of season to spray it. And it's going to mitigate any problems where you're going to harm beneficial insects or even plants in your garden.
Okay, I'm going to read a question here from Joan. She says, I understand that typically native plants are better for our pollinators, but I have different kinds of bumblebees that love my catmint and lavender.
Oh yeah. They love introduced species, unfortunately. That's why we have so many of them, especially bumblebees. If you know invasives, well, first of all, garden plants, that doesn't, I'm not categorizing that as invasives, and it's a food source for your bees, so it's important. But if you ever go in the East Gorge, and you're on a stewardship work party with me, and we're pulling yellow star thistle or teasel, oh my goodness, these are invasive weeds, and bees love them. That's why they're invasive, because they're reproductively successful, and bees like them. So yeah, still food source.
It's like why we pound candy and ice cream even though
yeah, I guess so. I don't think it's bad for the bees, but it's definitely not great for spreading weeds.
This question is going to have some words that I may not be able to pronounce. So, do many small bees buzz pollinate the poricidal anthrid flowers in the gorge? I don't know what that means, and that's why I'm here, so I can learn things. I've read about multiple species of larger bees that buzz pollinate, but have not heard about many small bees having that ability, such as for shooting star. Are there many small bees that visit it that can buzz pollinate those flowers? You may need to sort of if that question makes sense to you.
Yes, I heard the question. I think you were probably reading a species name that I don't know off the top of my head. But so bumblebees are the only bees capable of buzz pollination. But there's still, that is the ideal way to pollinate it. That doesn't mean that small bees aren't carrying a little bit of pollen back to another plant. So smaller bees, and there's not a ton of really small bumblebees, so they're the only ones that can buzz pollinate. So they definitely could still feed off of a flower. That doesn't mean they're going to perfectly pollinate it, and it also doesn't mean that it can't successfully pollinate it. It just might not be as well as a bumblebee would do it as efficiently.
Nora, who I think is tuning in from Seattle and is 6 or so, is wondering how many different colors do bees come in? I was surprised to see blue.
Oh my goodness, it's great. So many colors. So I worked when I was in college. This is really where the love comes from. I did a lot of research, and one of the things I did, my favorite things to do was look at my pin bees under a microscope to identify them and try to see what kind of bees they were and whatever, and label them. And even the bees that you think just look like plain black, when you look at them under a microscope, they're metallic purple, or they have orange stripes, especially the small ones. You just don't know. So many colors. And, you know, I would say the majority, there's a lot of yellow, black, and white, but especially the metallic ones, bright green and orange and blue and purple and red. There's red ones. You saw a red one on the last slide. Yeah, every color.
Does that have to do with camouflaging themselves, or? I mean,
yeah, I think depending on the size, yeah, for sure. Also, for instance, the yellow striping, that is what you call, I can't think of the term. But it's basically a warning coloration. There's some other word, cautionary coloration or something. It's a term used for, like, you know, a coral snake is red and black and yellow, and it tells you, get away from me.
Mm-hmm.
Or what's the one that looks just like it? The rat snake or the king snake? King snake looks just like it. It's mimicking the coral snake. It's not actually poisonous, or it's not going to hurt humans, but it's trying to look like it. It's a warning to tell things, I am going to hurt you if you mess with me. So a bumblebee is yellow and black because it's telling birds, specific birds are like the big eater bees, to back off because I could sting you.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question, and then while you think about your answer, I'm going to tell people about what's coming next month. So what I want to hear about is to take me back and tell me what it was that originally set you off down this path of having such passion for bees in high school, and why it, you know, sort of, if you were speaking to the kids tuned in tonight, or those of us who are coming new to this topic, just what are those things that really got you going? And while Frances thinks about that, I want to let you guys all know that we have a presentation next month, February. I am very excited about this. We have a unique history here with community health workers in the Gorge, and a long history. And we are very fortunate to have two of the longest running community health workers joining us next month, Tonya Sanchez and Joel Paleo. They are coming on February 9th is that presentation. It's an awesome history. It's two amazing people who understand our community unlike anyone else. And so I hope you will look ahead and plan for that. And okay, Frances, high school Frances.
High school Frances. I was always into insects. I loved them until you get to middle school, and then everyone thinks you're weird. So I didn't talk about them, didn't tell anyone about them for so long. And I had actually an English teacher who was really nice to me and kept bees and let me see his hive one time and taught me about them. And it sparked that again. And I decided I didn't care if I sounded like a nerd. And I started getting back into insects and bees. And that's my biggest thing, is things that aren't cool in middle school and high school are way cool when you really study hard and look into them and bring that passion as an adult. I promise it's a lot cooler when you're older. Well, maybe you might still think I'm a nerd.
No. This is your community, because Ali, we so appreciate, I have to say, from the moment we first got on the phone trying to figure out who could help share bees with the Sense of Place audience, it was so clear your passion, and obviously that came through again tonight. And I'm excited. I wish there wasn't snow on the ground so I could go out and start looking and thinking about what I'll do in my garden. So thank you so much, Frances. Thank you everyone who tuned in. Spread the word. We will get information on the website following this talk, so you can check back in on some of the stuff Frances talked about, and think about bees and care for them. Thank you all. Thank you, Frances. Take care.
Thanks so much, Sarah.